What's your story, Evan?
Well, I've been swimming since before I can remember. I guess my parents put me in the water when I was 2 or 3, and I joined the swim team when I was 6, and pretty much have been swimming the rest of my life ever since then. And I had a congenital hip dysplasia when I was born, and because of that, I haven't really been able to do many other sports. So swimming was kind of my one athletic outlet that I've had, and so that's just what I've done. I was doing competitive pool swimming as pretty much like a more than a part-time job, starting at about, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old,
Wow.
and I continued doing that through 2 years of college, and at that point, it just became too much with my academic workload, and I was burned out, and had kind of, I think, reached the limit of my ability in pool swimming, and so I kind of retired at that point. And about 10 years later, I discovered open water swimming, and that's what I've been doing since then. I did do, I guess, some master swimming through most of my 20s, so I wasn't completely out of the water by any means, but it was pretty half-hearted, I guess, until I found open water.
Yeah. When did you start pushing distances?
I guess it was I could point to one thing. It was probably the Big Shoulders 5K in Chicago. I did that in 2009, just kind of on a whim to see if I could do it. And that was how it happened. I loved it, and thought, well, I did 5K. I would try 10K, and then you just kind of go from there, and keeps building upon itself.
Yeah, I hear you. It feels like it's kind of infectious for the people that catch the bug, they kind of catch it quick.
Right.
So what do you think attracts you to continue swimming marathons?
I'm sorry, one more time.
Oh, I said what attracts you to continue swimming marathons?
I guess I enjoy trying to find out what my limit is. Kind of I enjoy the process of learning about the body of water and its moods and its personalities, and experiencing a body of water in a way that hardly anyone else gets to do in that particular way. You get to by being fully immersed, you get to experience it in a way that's much different than simply sitting on a beach and looking at a body of water, or even being on a boat. And it's very interesting and fulfilling to me.
Awesome. Can you describe a little bit about the kind of different personalities of bodies of waters that you've experienced?
Well,
comparatively, like maybe lake versus ocean. I don't know.
Sure, yeah. I mean, when I was first really starting to train up for big swims, I was living in Chicago, and I lived just a couple blocks from Lake Michigan, and so I was able to walk out my door and jump in the lake within just a few minutes. And Lake Michigan is enormous. Obviously, it shares some characteristics with an ocean that a smaller lake wouldn't have. But a body of water doesn't exist in isolation. It's in a particular climate that has particular weather patterns. And I think I got used to, I could tell based on the weather and the winds what kind of water temperature I was likely to encounter in the lake. In Lake Michigan, if there's any kind of west wind, at least when you're on the Chicago side, when there's any kind of west wind, it tends to get very cold very quickly because it pulls up the cold water from down below. And with a north wind or an east wind in the summer, it can get quite comfortable up in well into the 70s. And then, of course, in San Francisco, where I am now, the bay is just an incredibly dynamic body of water with profoundly strong currents that that vary by the tide cycle and also by the moon phase, and then that the currents are constantly interacting with the wind, and every time you go out there it's different, and so that makes it exciting, I guess.
Yeah. I just I liked how you described it. That's why I wanted you to dig into that a little bit. I've not heard people talk about the moods of the water before, but it's totally true. It's awesome.
Right.
How do you describe the feeling of completing a marathon swim?
Well, I'm sure it's different for everyone. For me, at least in the moment when I finish, it's relief more than anything. It's kind of like reminds me a little of finishing up at the dentist office or something. It's like, wow, I'm not in pain anymore. Isn't that nice? But of course, it's different than the dentist office in a lot of ways. There's a pride and an ecstasy of finishing a goal that you've been preparing for a long time. That, of course, lasts forever. I think I think about swims I did 10 years ago, and I still know what that felt like to finish. So that's my answer.
That's good. I like that. I like how you talk about it, like that it transcends time, because it's true, like it's fulfilling, it lasts forever. That's a really good point. Can you tell us about your favorite place to swim?
I feel very lucky to be able to have access to aquatic park and the South End Rowing Club in San Francisco. I think there's so many advantages in being an open water swimmer and living here that are very, very rare anywhere else in the world. But I would say that my favorite place to swim anywhere is Promontory Point in Chicago. I don't know if you know Promontory Point. It's on the south side. It's about 7 miles south of downtown Chicago in the Hyde Park neighborhood, where the President Obama lives, or where his house is there in Hyde Park. And like I mentioned before, this was kind of where I was swimming when I was first doing my first big swims. And my first 4-hour training swim was in Lake Michigan there at Promontory Point, and I met some really good people there, and we're still friends. And the point itself is a city park, and it's just so beautiful at any time of the year. I think especially in the fall, the leaves changing colors, and the setup for swimming there is just fantastic. The entry point, there's a ladder. The point is a kind of a landfill that sticks out into the lake by 300 or 400 yards, and the ladder that's out at the end of the point, where you get in on the ladder, and it's immediately like 10 feet deep.
Nice.
And you can swim. It's almost exactly half a mile to swim over to the pier to the south. And that's what most people do. They kind of swim laps between the point and the pier. It's a mile round trip. And you get all kinds of conditions. So I love it there. I miss it.
That's cool. Is there a favorite event that you've participated in? Marathon swim event that you'd recommend?
The marathon swimming scene now is so different than it was when I was kind of most active, which is about I guess 7 to 10 years ago. But I think if I had to pick one, it'd probably be the Manhattan Island Marathon swim in in 2011, which of course they now call 20 Bridges.
Yeah.
And the year that I swam around Manhattan, there's so many awesome people in the race. Sarah Thomas was doing her first, well, maybe she had done Catalina before that, but it was one of her first big swims. But Sarah says we were baby swimmers. That's how she describes it. We absolutely were baby marathon swimmers. Also there that day, like Greg O'Connor was there, Courtney Polk was swimming. John Van Wissa is not really active anymore, but that guy was like an incredible channel swimmer from Australia. Erica Rose won the race that day. She was competed professionally on the Phoenix circuit, super fast. Oliver Wilkinson, he's Australian living in England, still pretty active, amazing swimmer. But just, and then the environment there that day, like it was the same weekend as the Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame induction ceremony in New York.
Wow.
And so there was all these like famous marathon swimmers in town for that, and they came out to watch the start. And it was just so, I think I absolutely love New York Open Water and the people involved in New York Open Water, but I think one thing that's a little different nowadays is MIMS back then was a huge swim. I mean, there's like 50 people swimming at the same time.
Wow.
And it's much smaller nowadays. And so, but the scene where you have all these like really good marathon swimmers there at the same time, and then all these legends of the sport who were standing there watching, it was incredible. And I was in such great shape back then, like compared to now. So I missed that too. But yeah, so that was a highlight.
Yeah, yeah. Can you tell us about a swim that you're the most proud of?
You know, I think that the Rancho Evangelista Island swim that I did in February of this year, may be that swim that I'm most proud of. I think it was certainly the one where I was most uncertain if I could do it. It's not a long swim, but it has very challenging currents. And when you do it on February 1st, it's really cold. And so I had been training through the winter for a couple of months, starting in about mid-December, with Amy Gebser and Robin Rose and some of my South End friends, and we've been doing some good training in the cold water through December and January. And I was turning 40 in February, and thought, okay, I'm going to try this. I had done the Rancho Angel Island 5 years ago, but it was in the middle of summer, much warmer. And so I just wanted to challenge myself. And I thought, you know, if this ends up being a 6-hour swim, 52 degrees, that's going to be really hard. I'd been training pretty well, but I didn't know if I could do it. And then of course it turned into a 9-hour swim.
Wow.
And, you know, I was okay. Like I kind of reached a certain level of perception of cold in the first couple of hours, and then it just kind of held steady, and I was fine. So, and then of course, when you have a 6-hour swim that turns into a 9-hour swim, that it takes a lot of mental persistence to keep going. So, I guess maybe it would be that one.
That's fresh anyway, right?
Yeah.
But talk about that. What did you call it? Did you say mental persistence or mental persistence, right? Or resistance? Talk about that a little bit. How do you kind of develop or hone that?
I don't know.
Do you think you have it? You had it before you started swimming? Or do you think you've developed it?
I'm reluctant to say that one is just kind of born with it, because I don't think that's true. I think you can certainly develop it, but I've never been conscious of developing it myself, I guess. I think I've always been able to be persistent and when I needed to at whatever I needed to do. That's not to say that I always succeed in that, but I don't know. I think a lifetime of swimming gives you a self-awareness of what you can do and the signs of how well you're trained up and how you're feeling on a given day that can get you through stuff. And I don't know. I think when I'm doing a long swim, I think as much as possible, I just try to put everything out of my mind. I'm not thinking about anything, because if I start thinking about stuff and I'm in pain, usually it's going to be negative stuff.
Right.
I start talking myself out of things, and that doesn't help anything. So I try to kind of clean everything from my consciousness and focus on the sound of the splashing water and the feeling of the water on my body and kind of the things that I see underwater. But nothing, there's no running narrative, I guess, while I'm swimming. And I think that does help kind of keep going.
Yeah, that's good advice too. Can you tell us about a favorite memory from one of your swims? Or two, or three?
It's a tough one. There's a few, I guess, that compete. I think swimming down the Hudson at the end of the Manhattan swim, I ended up passing, I think, 4 people in the Hudson. Went from like 6th or 7th to 3rd.
Wow.
In the last part of that swim. And so that was pretty fun. My Santa Barbara Channel swim was tough for a lot of reasons. One of which was that there was a documentary being made while I was swimming it. I had my escort boat, and then there was the second boat that had a film crew on it. And there was that kind of added pressure of like, well, if I fail this, then it's all on tape.
Yeah.
But I remember, it was the conditions were really bad overnight, and it was a new moon, so it was super dark.
Oh man.
And I remember when there was first twilight in the sky in the morning. The first thing I remember seeing was the film guys. There was one of them in a scuba suit. Well, maybe not, like he didn't have a full tank or anything, but he had like a full wetsuit on with a GoPro like 10 feet below me. And I was just kind of laughing like at how ridiculous this is. Like that was the first thing I saw, was this dude underneath me like filming me. So anyway, it was another, I think, 3 hours after that before I finished. But that was, I think, a typical experience for these California channel swims. They start in the middle of the night, and then it's tough while it's dark, and then the sun comes up and everything is, roses and rainbows. But that's one that I remember.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that documentary? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it.
Sure. It's called Driven, and it follows 3 different swimmers who are doing Santa Barbara Channel swims in 2012. It's myself and Cherie Edberg, who is from Huntington Beach, California, and she did Anacapa to Oxnard swim. And then at the time, a 13-year-old girl, Fiona Go, who also did the Anacapa swim, and just kind of followed the 3 of us on our respective journeys, not just in the swim itself, but they talked to us beforehand. They kind of got into the background of it, into our lives a little bit. And Fiona actually didn't make it on her first try, and that was the one that was filmed. Actually, she didn't make it, and but then I don't think this mean, it's public record and everything, but
Yeah.
she eventually does, like on her second try, she comes back and finishes. And of course, my swim was really challenging for a lot of reasons. But anyway, it was great. Like they managed to get interviews with David Udevin, who is no longer with us, but is like one of the all-time great marathon swimmers, and who was the swim that I did from Santa Cruz to Oxnard. David Udevin was the first person to do that swim.
Wow.
So they got an interview with him. They interviewed Steve Minatones and Ned Dennison a few times. So, you know, it was kind of a glimpse into the three of us, but also just into the sport and the inner workings of marathon swimming. So it's on, I don't know, I can't give you the website off the top of my head, but you can like download it and watch it and stuff. If you're interested.
Yeah. We could put in the show notes too, if you want to push it out there. Can you tell us, is there anything you haven't finished?
As far as official swims go, no, I haven't. But there's plenty of training swims I haven't finished. Like, I definitely have experience like giving up on something and not feeling great about it afterwards, and knowing that I broke down mentally or physically, or some combination of the two. You know, growing up, there's times in my races, like my goals, swim cuts that I needed to make that I didn't make. Definitely not always succeeded at stuff. And I think it's not necessarily a good thing to never have finished because, to never have not finished. Because I mean, the question that comes up is, well, have you really challenged yourself sufficiently? If you're picking things that you know that you can do, and then you really never know what your limit is, and that's how you do fail. So anyway, it's not to say that I want to fail at something.
Right.
Nobody wants to do that. But,
yeah, but it is interesting when you'd said that that you like marathon swimming to push your limits. But yeah, if you haven't failed, have you pushed your limits? It's a good self-reflection.
Right. It's a conundrum.
Yeah. How's the pandemic been for you?
I wish I still had access to the South End Rowing Club. It's a really great facility, and it's nice to have access to the showers and the sauna after you go swimming, and you see more people more frequently. But other than that, honestly, I kind of like it. I don't need a lot of people around me to be emotionally okay. Like, I'm fine on my own with my wife or my cat. Like, it's fine. I don't mind.
Yeah. That's Yep. Let's see. So has there been any carryover? So I guess it hasn't been hard for you. So there's no like learnings you've had from marathon swimming that you've had to carry into your day life through the pandemic?
I mean, I guess what I would say is, like, if we're just talking about swimming, then that's my answer. But clearly the world is in a very bad place right now for a lot of reasons. So if we're getting into that, and I don't think we are, but I don't want to say that I think everything is wonderful and right now it's not. But in terms of like my specific experience of swimming in the context of the pandemic, then okay, it could be much worse.
Yeah. How would you say that you handle hard situations?
What's a hard situation? What are we talking about? Like like in the middle of a swim or something, or what do you mean?
Yeah, we can go with that. I guess I kind of leave it open to interpretation, but if you want to talk about it through swimming, that's super relevant. I think there is carryover though from what we learn in swimming can help us out in life. So you can take it wherever you want it.
I guess in the middle of the swim, I'm only aware of my own experience for the most part. there could be hard situations happening on the boat, and I don't really know what's going on there. It's hard enough to even hear them during a feed when they're trying to tell me something. So if we're, a hard situation within my own mind, like in a swim, if I'm struggling with something, again, I think I addressed this a little before, that I tried to clear everything out, and then avoid at all costs getting into kind of a spiral of negative emotions. Really, that doesn't help anything. But I don't know. A couple of swims in the past couple of years that I haven't been super well trained for. And I knew that I was not well trained for it. Like actually, the Portland Bridge swim a couple of years ago, I did that swim and a couple of weeks of training, and I knew like this is going to be painful. And so as much as possible, I just tried to focus on like it's super cool to be out here doing this swim, instead of being home on the couch or something, and all the other non-productive things I could be doing. I'm lucky to be here. I love Portland. It's cool to see it from this angle. I try to proactively find the positive aspects of the situation. I'm not naturally good at that anyway, but I think it has helped situations on swims.
Yeah, changing perspective, so to speak. You'd mentioned about clearing your mind. Is that something you practice outside of swimming, or is swimming kind of your activity for clearing your mind?
Yeah, just swimming. I'm not a Buddhist or a yoga practitioner or anything like that. And I don't really have any systematic way of doing that or anything that I've learned. But yeah, so swimming I think is the main venue for that practice.
How about adapting? How do you adapt to changing conditions?
Well, I think you have to accept that the water is far more powerful than you are, and you're not going to be able to fight it. And so if you accept that, then it comes down to adapting to it. And the water, the conditions, they are what they are. There's nothing you can do about it. And so the best you can do is kind of adapt your stroke to it. And the one phrase I really like that comes from David Barra is you come to a temporary agreement with the water. And it's not always easy and it's not always pleasant, but the more that you can keep a steady state mentally and have different gears in your stroke, different kind of techniques to deal with. Like some people do the kind of windmill Janet Evans style stroke when there's big waves and stuff, so they don't get their hand caught on the water, and that's kind of an interesting adaptation. But there's stuff like that that you learn from a lot of open water experience.
Yeah, that's good advice. What advice would you give to an aspiring marathon swimmer?
Let's see. I would, a little cynical, but I would say try not to put too much stock in other people's lists or things that you think that other people think are important. Because this is such a personal journey, each of these swims, and each body of water is so different. Like I know people like the Triple Crown and the Ocean 7 and stuff, that they're kind of arbitrary. Just list somebody else made up, and they're great swims. I don't mean to put down any of those swims, but I think it's maybe more fulfilling if you approach it like these are very interesting bodies of water that I want to learn about, and different countries and cultures that I can experience along the way. And I think that is more of a lasting experience than just like checking a box on somebody else's checklist. I get the feeling is how it's sometimes approached. That, and then the second thing I'd say is try to think of ways that you can uniquely contribute to the sport that are more than just doing swims. Because the swims are very selfish endeavors. You take, and you depend on the generosity of so many other people. And whether that's starting a new event or taking over an existing event to race direct, or to start a community somewhere where you live, start an open water community, or and I've spent a lot of time trying to create various resources for developing the sport. That's kind of what I've honestly, like, the past 5 years, put most of my time into compared to actually doing swims. And I think that can be a more lasting way to participate in the sport. I think doing the training that you need to do for these really long swims is pretty tough to sustain unless you have your life set up in a very specific sort of way. And I honestly, I enjoy swimming more when there's not as much pressure to like go in every single day and do a bunch of mileage. It's hard. Like, I did it for a couple of years, and I couldn't sustain it. But if you have other outlets for that, other ways to participate and to contribute, then I would encourage that for anyone getting into the sport now, to start thinking about that.
That's awesome advice. Do you consider yourself a process or an outcome person?
I don't really know what that means, but I guess it depends on how important the outcome is. And how, like, I'm outcome oriented if I really need the outcome. But if I don't, then I think it's probably more enjoyable to enjoy the process. But I don't know. I can't say one way or the other.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I just think it's kind of a fascinating, when you think about different training styles, and some people are really driven by the miles they get in, and yeah, can be really focused on that process, and the outcome is important, or it's fulfilling maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about.
It varies on any given day, honestly.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, some days, like, I need to get a 4-hour training swim in today. And so at 3 hours, you're like, this really sucks. And so if you're process oriented, then maybe you think, well, I've done enough. I'll go get the sauna now. But if you're outcome oriented, stick it out for another hour. But if I don't need the 4-hour training swim in, and I'm just trying to have a nice swim, that's a little different.
Yeah. Yep. Whose marathon swim story do you want to hear?
I think it looks like you've already covered a couple of my very favorite swimmers. Sarah, I think you're either have just done Caroline or you have her coming up.
Next week, yeah.
Michelle Macy, obviously, is a super interesting lady, and an awesome swimmer. But I guess I'd suggest talking to Anthony McCarley. He's an interesting guy and has accomplished a lot in his like non-swimming world, but also he's done some awesome swims, all of which he did after the age of 50. And I think it's pretty impressive what he's done. And he's done probably has some interesting stories from those swims. Jesse Harowitz from Vancouver is one of my favorites. She's, she lives in a different, like a little international. Vancouver, I guess, is technically international. Speaking to her, in many ways just be speaking to an American, but she's done some really amazing swims up there in British Columbia, and just been doing a lot to create community up there. So she's fun. Those are two that come to mind.
Awesome. I love your advice for aspiring marathon swimmers about, like that, because I think that's something, at least that's been on my mind. Those last few sessions, we've had some talks about inclusion, and, in a not very diverse sport, we kind of switched over to inclusivity and, like, not just focusing on the people that are doing the iconic swims, and, and talking about people who are doing, just kind of water discovery. So it's, so anyway, I just thought that was great advice for aspiring swimmers.
It's a very, very white privileged sport.
Yeah.
And that is troubling. I think there's some aspects that can't be helped, like, a charter boat is going to cost what a charter boat costs.
Yeah.
And that's an expense that's not going away anytime soon. But I think that and doing swims in New York City is never going to be cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we can, as a community, the more that we can focus on creating experiences and creating events that do save costs and are financially accessible to people. And I think some of that is maybe developing sport and creating events in new locations where these expenses and taxes have not quite crept in as much as they have in some of the hotspots like New York, and gosh, even I did Catalina in 2011, and like the cost of the boats now for that swim have doubled from when I did it. And I'm pretty sure that the cost of living hasn't doubled, and people's salaries haven't doubled in 9 years, but that's what happens with super popular swims in super expensive locations.
Yeah.
I think, talk to Blake Ogle in Oxford.
Yeah, he's a couple
that's
weeks
another recommendation. I know he's working on some ideas that to create some events there that are pretty epic at the same time, not hopefully costing an arm and a leg. So
yeah,
just new efforts like that to grow the sport in new places can help with that, and of course addressing cultural issues that prevent people from culture and economic, obviously, issues that prevent people from learning swimming at a young age, and getting directed into and just encouraged to join swim teams and developing that skill early on. I think marathon swimmers don't come out of nowhere. They oftentimes have some background in sport, and it's a matter of encouraging the development of that background earlier on in a wider range of people.
Yeah, well, that's good. Are there any non-white marathon swimmers that you know of?
Yeah, there's a friend of mine in the Southern Rowing Club. His name is Naji Ali.
Yeah, I think he was my observer for Tahoe last year. Okay.
Okay.
Like the third person I need to just reach out to. Yeah, okay.
Naji's awesome. And super interesting to speak to. And I think he'd probably be happy to talk to you.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Evan. I appreciate it.
Thanks for talking to me. It's been fun.